Joining me today is Chris Gatlyn. For more than 20 years, Chris has invested deeply in the lives of college students as a mentor, coach, and guide, helping them develop clarity around faith, purpose, leadership, and responsibility. He serves as a regional director for the Navigators, a Christian ministry where his focus is on college campuses across the East Coast. Chris is the husband of the beautifully talented wife and the father of two sons and a daughter, which also gives him a very real perspective on many of the things we're talking about today. Chris, I'm really glad you're here.
Excited to be here, man.
When we chatted not too long ago, it was sunshine outside, everything was going well, and then you confirmed that you could do it this morning, and all of a sudden, the storm clouds came in, the rain came in, and that's what we got this morning.
That's right.
I thought you were pouring sunlight
onto
the world, but maybe that's not the case.
I was doing my best, but apparently I'm not, because there's a lot of rain.
I don't know. We started right now, and the good Lord's looking at us, and I see the clouds going away, and the beautiful sun is winking at us. So I think it's perfect timing, Chris. Well, welcome. And all joking aside, you really are pouring a lot of sunshine into a lot of places, including the most important areas, many of us would say, is our college campuses, where our youth are trying to figure out life and seeing where their role is going to be. And you've been doing it for over 20 years now. And how are we doing? What's kind of the state of the campuses? And tell us a little bit about your role and kind of what your sense is from having your fingertips on the pulse.
Yeah. So, well, as far as my role goes, so my wife and I are missionaries to college students, and so we have the privilege of investing in the next generation. My current role is I serve providing leadership training and coaching for all of our campuses in the Mid-Atlantic region, so all of our ministries in Virginia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland I have the privilege of providing leadership for. And, in terms of what is happening on the college campus, I would say maybe I'll tell you the way things were, and then I'll tell you what's happening now.
I love it.
So I think some interesting things that used to be true about the college campus. I think that, it's a hard job, right? Trying to pursue spiritually interested college students. I think that historically, students have been hit or miss. And there typically has also been a struggle to find and reach guys, right? Those have typically been some of the struggles over the years. But I'm excited to share that some of those things are no longer the case. And in the last few years, what we've seen is we've seen a real genuine spiritual awakening happening on our campuses across our nation. And we've seen a significant increase in spiritual interest, spiritual hunger among students. We've seen a much higher percentage of guys have spiritual hunger and interest than what we've seen in the past. And frankly, what we're seeing now, I don't think I would call it a revival, but I certainly would call it a strong spiritual awakening that's happening not just in the Mid-Atlantic, but certainly on our campuses in the Mid-Atlantic, but nationally. And I think there is a significant increase in spiritual hunger and thirst and curiosity that has been incredible. Just one kind of cool example on one of our campuses in New Jersey, one of our staff was sharing with me that, probably 4 or 5 times this semester, she's been in the student union reading her Bible, and 4 or 5 different times, students that she did not know, that she had never met before, came up to her and said, "Hey, are you reading the Bible? Hey, I have questions about the Bible. Could I ask you some of my questions?" And in 20 years of ministry, I have not seen things like that happen before. And so we're in this really incredible season where God is moving on the hearts of students and doing something new and beautiful and unique. And it's exciting to get to be a part of it and to see what God's doing as he touches and changes the lives of students.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for the great service you've done. But I want to say, you say you've been doing this for over 20 years. I think you're far too young to be able to do anything for 20 years. Do you get mistaken for being a student sometimes?
Periodically,
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
I think it could be because I look young and ripped and buff.
Yeah, exactly what it is. But that's why you're a good fit on campus, too, because you're so youthful and taking good care of yourself. You say this revival, maybe in the last few years, other than COVID happening in the last 5 years, what do you think is kind of triggering this? Why the difference now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have some ideas. I don't know if I'd say these are definitely the reasons, but I have some thoughts. I think one of the things that's certainly we've seen in the last 5 years or maybe a little more is, I think as our culture has turned a bit more negative and divisive and tribal, and as we've seen a little more political divisiveness, I think that a lot of students are starting to see what our culture is offering to them, and they're saying, that doesn't seem very appealing to me. Like, I don't want to be like those. If that's what adults look like, I don't think that's not what I want. That's not who I want to be. That's not the kind of person that I want to be. And so, and I think additionally, I think that students now are trying a lot of the things that our culture says, these are the things that you need that will actually make you happy. And if you do these things, you'll be satisfied. And I think they're trying a lot of those things, and they're saying, hey, I tried these things that you said were going to make me happy, but they didn't actually work. And so maybe there is something to this God thing. Maybe there is something to this spiritual thing that maybe I should give this an honest look. And so I think students in a lot of ways are discontent with kind of the way that our culture is and the way that it operates, right? And I think they're looking for something real and genuine and authentic. And I think they're looking to say, is there a better way to live life than what I've seen, I've observed, and what's been offered to me by our current culture? And so I think it's promoting and provoking curiosity in them, where they're willing to say, more so than any time I've ever seen in 20 years, where they're willing to say, hey, I'm open to this God thing. Like, what does the Bible have to say, and how is it relevant to my life? Like, could we talk about it?
Yeah, I sense that with young people, there's always a bit of a counterculture. My parents think this, I'm going to think a little bit differently. But maybe there's something more going on right now, where the lack of trust that's happening with institutions, with other things that are right in front of them, and maybe even the greater culture pushing different messages on them, and they're scratching their heads. I'm not sure. That's interesting you say it's a little different than the counterculture of maybe the 60s or 70s. But they didn't, if there was a counterculture then, they didn't go towards God. So I guess the follow-up question is disheartened, disconnected with the culture is one thing, but then being pulled towards the Bible and God's teachings, what's maybe there? What are they seeking from that message that's resonating right now?
I think students are trying to find meaning and purpose. I think ultimately they want to know, what is going to provide me meaning, purpose, and fulfillment. And they're looking for that, and they've looked in all these other places, and they haven't been able to find it. And so now I think they're saying, maybe is it possible that God could provide the meaning and purpose and fulfillment that I'm looking for? Because trying all these other things, I still feel empty, and there's got to be something, there's got to be more to life than just this. And so I think that curiosity, that question is continuing to provoke them and spark them to be curious.
It's interesting you say that, because even with, I'm a little older than you are, with the generation of the 40s and 50-somethings, there's being a lot more written about, hey, you've had success in the first 20, 30 years of your professional life.
Yep.
Where is that fulfillment? Are you getting a sense of purpose? Is this everything that's out there?
Yep.
I'm sensing also that there's a bit of an awakening amongst an older generation too, and there's maybe an appetite for more Christian faith for this group too, as they look for purpose and legacy and some of these other dynamics that are less self-centered as well. On a practical level, young 20-somethings, what are the issues? How are they doing? Maybe for the older generation that doesn't interact with, besides maybe their grandkids or their kids, but how are they doing? Where are they struggling? And what maybe is giving you a little bit of hope too?
Yeah. Well, I think this is a challenging time to be a teenager, a 20-something. I think generally speaking, I would say that people in that age, they are struggling, right? They've grown up with, they've only and always known technology, right? They've never not known that. And so it's challenging. Well, I would say 95% of students that come into our universities today are completely addicted to their phones, right? And
you say that again. What percentage?
probably 95%
About
students
95%
are addicted to their
essentially
phones.
all.
And so almost everybody. And of that, the vast majority of them are also addicted to social media. And so over and over, right, study after study after study has been done that has said the more that you engage in social media, the higher the rates of depression, anxiety, and all kinds of mental health struggles. And I would say that we're seeing that, right? We're seeing students that are coming in and they're struggling with their mental health. Some of that is linked to their involvement on social media and their addiction to it, right? And so they're given these sort of unrealistic expectations of what life could be like as people kind of portray their very best self, their very best life. Here's all the things. And when their life doesn't match up to that, right, it's pretty discouraging when you look and you're seeing all these people and their life seems so great. And you're like, my life seems so challenging and normal and ordinary. You know, what's wrong with me? And so I think, and in regards to technology and phones, your phone has kind of been, it can be used in really good ways. But I think it's important to remember that the app makers have created these apps to addict you, to have you to spend more and more and more time on your phone. And so what that does is it creates a situation where students and people are kind of taught that the most important thing in your life is this electronic object as opposed to the people who are right in front of you, right? And so you'll go places and you see families or friends and they'll be out to dinner or eating, and instead of talking to one another, they'll actually be on their phones, and you're like, hey, why did you go out to dinner just so you could have stayed on your phone for free at home, And you're like, but they're struggling to realize, hey, the person in front of you is always more important than whatever's happening on your phone, right? And so I think mental health struggles, I think some of those things, and then I think there's also an extraordinary amount of pressure on students these days, pressure to get life right, pressure to make a life for themselves, pressure to prove that they are someone and somebody. I think it's interesting the level of pressure that students feel. Some of it self-imposed, some of it imposed by parents, some of it imposed by society. But it's interesting just the level of pressure that teens and early 20s kind of feel on their lives. And I don't know about you, but anytime I've observed, whenever I feel pressure, bad things happen, right? Like pressure doesn't help. Pressure doesn't help marriages or people or friendships, right? And so I think those are some of the challenges that they're facing. I think what gives me hope is knowing that the gospel of Jesus has an answer to every single question that students have today, and the Bible has an answer to all of their questions. And what gives me hope is to realize that in the midst of their struggles, in the midst of their searching, that there is an earnestness amongst students, like a genuine hunger, a genuine curiosity, a genuine teachability, where they say, if there's something true that I'm missing, I want to know about it. Like, could you share it with me? And so in the midst of all of that, I think their honest searching and their honest pursuit of truth and their honest pursuit of more of is there something more to life than this, I think is really encouraging, because, the Bible says if you search for God, you'll find him. Right? And so that's what's happening now, is students are searching for God and they're finding him.
What are maybe the one or two questions that most come up, and how is God answering that in a way that's helping? How is the Word answering that in the conversations that you're having with them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say one of the challenges that students now and have always, faced as they think about the existential questions of life is kind of, okay, if there is a good God, then why, when I look around in this world, do I see so much difficulty and brokenness and evil and just bad things happening, right? And reconciling the goodness of God with the brokenness and sin and evil in the world is a question that people have wrestled with for, generations. And and I think as we engage students on that and lots of questions that they're wrestling with, I think that it is, I think in a lot of ways, what they're being challenged with and what we challenge them with is that, what if your perspective of God is not right? Right? If your perspective of God is that God is kind of like Santa Claus and whatever I want, he should give me, versus, if your perspective of God is about my comfort, that's what comfort and ease, that's what God must be about, as opposed to God being about my growth, my character transformation, my becoming more like him, right? If God is about those things, then there is obviously a place for difficulty and suffering and tribulation and trials and how God can use those for our good and for the good of others, right? And so part of it is helping students understand, what if your view of who God is a little off, right? And what if your view of what is good in life can sometimes be off? And how might God want to use difficulty and suffering to grow you, to develop you, to change you, to build resilience into your life and perseverance and things that you're going to need for the rest of your life? And so I think for a lot of students, that ends up being a little bit of a light bulb moment of, I haven't really thought about it like that before. I just tend to think about the immediate ramifications of this circumstance right now and not how that might shape or change me, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. The colleges themselves, I mean, you've got this student population that's yearning for some of this.
Yep.
What are the challenges for a Christian ministry, or the opportunities for Christian ministries on our college campuses, and then where else potentially to find an audience that is open and welcoming? Is some people from afar would say, boy, are our college campuses really open and welcoming to this type of mission? What are you finding there?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly there's some variation amongst the colleges for sure. Mm-hmm. But generally speaking, I think what I would say is that, colleges, certainly the college campus is a very liberal place, generally speaking. And I would say colleges tend to more tolerate Christian ministries as opposed to support them or welcome them. I don't think I would use the word support or welcome. Mm-hmm. I would say, they tend to tolerate us. I'm probably because they have to. Mm-hmm. And so it can be, it is, it's a challenging environment, to be honest, to navigate in a space where you're kind of not really wanted by most administrations, but they know that they kind of have to let you be there. And so they kind of, often they'll do the minimum amount that they can to say that they allow you to exist there, but not more than that. Mm-hmm. And so I would say we have to tread carefully and wisely because, oftentimes the things that we believe are contrary to some of the values and principles that a lot of the, secular universities today are wanting to move forward in their values. And so those things can clash. And so I would say we have to be wise and careful in navigating a complex campus environment.
Do you ever have situations where the adults are there and they're coming to you and wanting to learn more about this too? Or is it always the student-centric? Because I know on college campuses, even some that are probably less welcoming than others, there are professors and there are coaches and there are folks that certainly have a strong faith, and they're not shy about it themselves as they're interviewed and talking about it. So there's personalities and individuals, and then there's kind of the culture of the campus and the policies of the campus. But do you have, as you're encouraging students, do you ever have adults kind of say, "Hey, I'm curious too"?
It's a good question. I would say that for us, the vast majority of the time, 99% of the time, it's the students. Mm-hmm. There are some ministries that are a little more focused on a college campus, on adults, so on coaches, on professors. There are ministries that kind of focus on that demographic. I would say for us, we're primarily focused, and the majority of campus ministries are primarily focused on students. There are things, I think, taking place amongst coaches and amongst professors. but usually they're taking place in some of the ministries that tend to focus on that particular demographic, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. Our greater culture and the messages that they're having. What are the challenges? What are the obstacles? What do you sense are the most unhelpful dynamics of our culture today for not even beyond a Christian walk, but just for those who are choosing not the Christian faith, that are also struggling with anxiety, depression, all these other things. What are those outside forces right now that we adults maybe to be more attuned of the damage or the challenges that it's putting on top of our already difficulties that people have going through their teenage and young 20s?
Yeah. Well, I think some of the messages that our culture is sending today and communicates through, writing, through music, through movies, through shows, I think some of these messages are really harmful to us. So, for example, that life should be all about you, right? That life should be about me, my personal fulfillment, and I should just, I'm going to do me, right? And, thinking that life is primarily about me and what I want is detrimental to all of my friendships. It's detrimental to my future marriage. It's detrimental to me as a future parent, right? It's detrimental to me as a worker, right? If my view of life is that everything should be about me, right, then everything that I do will be selfish. And that harms a society, that harms families, that harms kids, that harms coworkers, that harms everybody. And so there is an intense self-centeredness in our culture that is kind of promoted on, you just need to think about yourself. And when you start believing that, that will ultimately destroy everything in your life. I think another one, as you think about, different messages that our culture is sending. So in addition to being, everything is all about me, right? I think is the value that life is primarily about comfort and ease. And if you think about our culture, right, some of our highest values are comfort and ease. And so we tend to make a lot of choices around what is best for my comfort and what's the easiest path, right? But you and I both know that the easiest path is not necessarily the best path or the most helpful or the most developmental path. It just might be the simplest path. And so when you think that life is about your own comfort and your own ease, you're going to make decisions, you're going to treat people in such a way that everything is about how you could be more comfortable. And if you think about, all of the greatest things that have ever been done in the history of the world in any field, none of them have ever been centered around comfort and ease, right? When life is about comfort and ease, then it leaves out things like sacrifice, and it leaves out things like commitment, and it leaves out things like perseverance and resilience and doing hard things. And so when some of those messages are being pushed on people, it causes you to think a certain way and operate in a certain way, all of which become detrimental to them and detrimental to others.
Are you seeing some fissures within that where do you see the healthy messages and where are we getting it right as a culture? If anywhere.
It's a good question. I think that this next generation, some of the things that I love about them is that they want to make an impact. Mm-hmm. I think that they see things that are broken in the world, and instead of saying, who cares, that's not my problem, I think they're saying, hey, why don't we try to do something to fix that? And I think that's incredibly admirable and beautiful and a wonderful quality in them. They don't just look at problems and say, well, that's somebody else's problem, but they're like, hey, how could we fix that? What could we do to make that better? And so I think I do love the idea of them pursuing impact, of them pursuing, like, I have the ability to bring about change. I think that they are more open to, they're more open to change, than previous generations. And so that can be really good if the change is positive and if it's moving towards change that is helpful. So I think those are probably a couple of things that come to mind that I'd say, yeah, these are great things that, another one that I would say is that I think this generation is willing to share weakness, and they're willing to be more authentic. They want to see authenticity. They really value authenticity. And so they're willing to share and show weakness. And I think that that's something that most previous generations weren't willing to do, right? If previously, my parents' generation, their parents' generation, it's like if you had a weakness, you just keep that to yourself. You never let anybody see it. You just power through it. That's that. And this generation is willing to share their weaknesses, their struggles, and I think that that's good and right and beautiful. And I think it helps people to recognize that we all are pretty similar, actually, that we're not so crazy different, but that we all have far more in common than not. And I think that's a really helpful thing for people to know and to see and realize. And one other thing that I think our culture is doing well now is I think they've brought to the surface talking about struggles with mental health and making that a normal part of the conversation. And whereas 20 years ago, it was not a normal part of the conversation. No one was talking about mental health. If students had struggles with mental health, they were an anomaly if they actually talked about it. The struggles have always been there, but to actually feel the freedom to bring it up, to talk about it, to actually seek out help, that wasn't happening 20 years ago. It was, let me keep it under wraps, let me keep it to myself, let me hide it. Whereas now, I love the fact that when people are struggling, they have the freedom to be able to say so and to seek out help without being kind of judged or shamed or people looking down upon them. And so I think in a lot of ways, that is a much healthier way to operate, that whether it's mental health or emotional, whatever it is, but when we have problems, it's only healthy that we're able to communicate those, that we're able to talk about those, and that we don't stuff our problems, hide our problems. When those things happen, problems just grow. And so I think those are some ways that, our culture's moving in the right direction in some of those regards.
How about things like dating? Not you anymore. But on our college campuses, yeah. I know you're having lots of conversations with our youth. Alcohol, drug use, and just dating and relationships and propelling to healthy, strong, serious relationships that launch to marriage and kids. And when that happens, where are our college students right now on that battlefield?
Yeah, this is an area where I think they're struggling right now. And so there currently are fewer this is since the United States has been formed, we're currently living with the highest percentage of unmarried people and with single people than we've ever had. And not only are there more unmarried people, but people are actually marrying later in life than they used to. And I think there's lots of dynamics going on with that, but I think some of the factors involved there are that students are more fearful of dating than they used to be. They're less comfortable with dating. Some of it is that they feel less comfortable in themselves to be able to relate well with someone of the opposite gender. And I think part of that is they're spending so much time growing up on screens that they're not spending as much time with people that like we, had to when we were growing up. And so that creates a level of comfortability for us that we could engage people and that was normal. But for them, their social skills are probably, this is a generalization, but their social skills are not as strong as previous generations because they've spent less time connecting with people and more time on screens. And so I think with that comes less experience in dating, less confidence in dating. It feels to them like a bigger risk. They're having a little bit less courage to enter into dating relationships, and I think they are a little bit more afraid, and so therefore they're willing to take fewer risks than previous generations in terms of dating, right? Like you and I, it was very common growing up that you'd go ask somebody out and you have to risk the rejection of are they going to say yes or no? And there's a good chance they could say no, and then we have to figure out how to pick ourselves up and realize I'm going to be okay. It's going to be all right. And rejection is a part of life sometimes, and we can keep going. And, but I think in this current generation, rejection feels stronger and it feels more like it says something about who I am and their identity than it did for us. And rejection always hurts no matter how old you are. But I think that the level that rejection hits today amongst a teenager or 20-something, it hits a lot deeper than it used to. And I think part of that is, putting your identity in the wrong thing and in the wrong place. But I think, so all that to say, I think that dating is an area where they're struggling and they're trying to move in the right direction. But I think a lot of it is they're not super confident in themselves, and they think, if I don't feel confident in me, how could I possibly, date someone? And so, I think there's some struggles there, and that's leading to more, fewer people are dating in college, which means fewer people are getting married shortly after college, which means now more people are leaving college and they're single and they go to live in some city that they, don't know very many people in. And so now they're starting over relationally wherever they get their job. And so now they're starting from kind of ground zero, and now it's like, I've got to build a new friend base, and how am I supposed to meet people of the opposite gender? And so on and so forth. And now you have people meeting people later and marrying later and being single longer, and some of those challenges.
And that is a good transition to you and your role as a parent as well when it comes to dating and all those other issues. So you have the experience on college campuses for 20 plus years, and now you have your father of three, so you and your beautiful bride wrestle with a lot of things. And so maybe we'll talk a bit about talking to and with adults. What are we doing well as parents, and what do we maybe need to think a little bit more about?
Yeah. I think one of the hardest truths about being a parent is to recognize that our emotional health, our emotional and spiritual health, is probably the number one thing that will dictate how good of a parent we will be, right? And what I mean by that is whatever you don't transform, you transmit, right? In other words, whatever issues I have in my life that I don't allow God to change and transform, right? Whatever those issues are, if I don't get change in those areas, I'm going to transmit those issues onto my kids. Those issues will hurt and wound my kids. And it's a difficult thing, I think, to look yourself in the mirror and to say, okay, what in me needs to change so that I can be a more loving husband, a more loving father, a more loving and devoted follower of Jesus? What in me needs to change so that I can be a healthy person, so that I can effectively love and care for my kids, right? Because as a parent, you want to love your kids, not wound your kids, right? And I think it's a difficult thing to deal with those things, to sometimes go to the counseling that you need to be able to deal with some of the issues that we have in our own lives, or issues from our childhood or from our parents or whatever it may be. And that is a really, really hard thing to do. But I think that if we're willing to do that, then it gives us a healthy foundation to build from, to say, okay, I've learned to become, by the grace of God, an emotionally and spiritually healthy person, right? Who has the ability now to be able to acknowledge to my kids when I'm wrong, to be able to apologize to my kids when I make mistakes. And if you've been a parent for longer than one day, you know that you make mistakes, right? But to be able to go to your kids and to say, when I did that, when I said that, when I got upset, when I lost my patience, when I said those unkind words, hey, that was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? Right? That's what spiritually and emotionally mature people do. And it's what our kids need to see, right? Because our kids, there is no such thing as the perfect parent or the perfect person. We can't be that, but we can model for our kids, what does it look like to make mistakes and then to own them and to repent of them and to reconcile and to move back towards God and towards people. That is a really important thing to model, because that's all of our lives, right? No matter how old you are, your story is every day you screw up, you make mistakes, you drop the ball. The question is, how do you respond to those? And then what are you modeling for your kids in that? And I think some of the things that I think our culture gets right about parenting today is, I love that our culture is focused on wanting to love your kids. I love that our culture is focused on trying to, I think parents are often more engaged, with kids than maybe they have been in the past, particularly fathers. I think it's a beautiful thing that our culture values, spending time with your kids, that it values family time, that it values, dads being more involved as opposed to maybe a couple of generations ago when it was more like, hey, it's the mom's job to raise it, it's the dad's job to kind of do the work, and the dad will pop in here and there. But I love the fact that when we go to all of our kids' events, it's moms and dads there, and I love that. I think that's so great, and it's healthy for kids to be fully relationally engaged with both parents and for them to feel like they're a priority to both parents. And so I think those are some of the great things. I think maybe some places where we're maybe missing it a little bit in parenting. I think we have such a desire to want to help our kids and bless our kids that we don't want to allow our kids to fail and to learn from their mistakes, right? I think when I as a parent step in and kind of rescue my kids from every problem they have, when I step in and don't allow them to fail, when I step in and sort of like, pave the way for them and sort of remove all of their obstacles and struggles, when I do that as a parent, I'm actually doing a disservice to my kids, right? Because part of life is learning, how do I make mistakes and then learn from it and recover from it? How do I make mistakes? How do I go through hard things and learn to become a resilient person that picks myself back up and keeps going? Because that's what real life is you fall down and you have to, whether it's in marriage or parenting or work or whatever it is, that's real life. And so I think a lot of parents are unintentionally harming their kids by making their lives easier, more comfortable, sort of diminishing their level of struggle, only to realize, maybe forgetting to realize, that struggle is what we need to grow and to develop. And if kids get to college, as they often do, and they haven't had many challenges or struggles, right, then when they get to college, when challenges come, they're not prepared for when times get hard, which they always do. They're not prepared to be able to handle those. And they're like, what do I do now, right? And it's like, man, I wish that their parents had let them experience the challenges and struggles and normal failures of life and let them wrestle through it, or coach them and teach them how to wrestle through it so that they could come out on the other side and say, hey, I can do this. Like, if I press into God, I can learn from these struggles. I can learn from my mistakes. That's part of life.
And even something as simple as asking a girl for a date and her rejecting you, get up from that, and it's okay. It's not your identity. It's her loss.
That's right.
In that instance. How about pressure? You spoke earlier about pressure, and our young people are putting some of it on themselves, some of the culture, and even some of the adults and parents are doing it. Where are parents maybe putting pressure on kids? And not all pressure is bad. Sometimes you're holding somebody accountable or things like that.
Yep.
But where are we putting pressure on our youth where maybe it's a little heavier than intended?
Yeah. I think a couple of places where I see a lot of pressure, I think one is academically on kids. I think kids are more stressed about their academics. High school kids and college kids are more stressed about their academics than any time that I've ever seen in the last 20 years. And I think that certainly academics are important, and doing well in school is a good thing, and it's an important thing. But when you make that the ultimate thing, it becomes a bad thing. And I think a lot of parents have unintentionally, I'm going to say, overemphasized academics and academic performance to a point where kids are just feeling so much pressure that they're living under this like anxiety and stress of like, oh my gosh, like I have to get an A, and not only does it have to be, it has to be a high A, and all these kinds of things. And whereas I think a better, healthier approach would be, hey, listen, academics are important. We want you to do your best. You go in, do the best that you can, and if the best that you can do is an A, then we're going to celebrate that. If the best you can do is a B, then we're going to celebrate that. But we want you to put in your best effort, and we're going to celebrate whatever that is. And I think kids feel like, man, I'm not allowed to I have to only get straight A's all the time. And when you live under that kind of pressure, it's difficult. It's a very stressful way to live. And I think that to communicate to kids that sort of they're, whether explicitly or implicitly communicating to them, hey, everything in your life rides upon how well you do academically. I don't think that's a healthy message to communicate to kids. Certainly is it important to say, hey, your academics matter, and that affects the kind of college you get into, and that can affect the kind of job you can have. Sure. But but to go that extra step and to say, your entire future rests upon, exactly how well you're going to do and this and getting these grades and whatever. And if you don't, things aren't going to go well for you. That's an awful lot of stress and pressure to put on a 17, 18, 19-year-old kid that's just trying to do their best to get through.
You see it in athletics too.
Yes.
You talk about the snow plowing parents pushing
Yes.
things aside, or are going to really invest in all this programming, and a young person's identity is wrapped up in that sport or getting A's or getting into that top tier school. And if for some reason that doesn't happen,
Yep.
what does that do to the soul and the identity of the young person? That just puts a lot of stress, and culture does too. Do you sense some of that's changing as you talk to students, where maybe that Ivy League isn't as important as it was before, or is it just the same amount that you saw 15, 20 years to the students that are out there?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I would say I think students are probably more perfectionistic and performance oriented and achievement oriented than they used to be even. I think that mentality has sort of been drilled into their minds, whether by culture or it could be by their parents or whoever. And so that's a difficult, it's hard to enjoy life if everything is about how you perform, right? If you're only as good as your last performance, if your identity and worth is based upon how well you did on your last test or in this last class or whatever, you're constantly on the hamster wheel of performance, trying to do better, do more, keep working hard, keep all the balls in the air. And that's a hard way to live.
Even navigating space on a daily routine and a schedule. Some of these 14, 15-year-olds, and even more so at college level at times, you're up early in the morning and you're training and then you're prepping and you go to school all day, and then your after school sport, and then maybe you have dinner with your family, but that's sometimes very quick, and it's not, and there's maybe even a TV on at the same time, or there's distractions on, and then boom, it's homework and you're going to bed and you do the same thing again, back to that achievement mindset. And when you talk with folks, what strategies maybe are smart to get space and some breath in a schedule and in a life?
Yeah. Well, I think, I'd love to share some of my own wrestlings and struggles on this issue. I think this is, especially when you bring in the role of sports in kids' lives, the way that I would say is, well, my kids do play travel sports. And I would say half the days of the year, I'm like, you know what, this is great. Like, they're having a great time. They're having so much fun. They're doing something they love. And I mean, this is awesome. And the other half of the days of the year, I'm like, travel sports are from Satan. They divide families. They pull people apart. They prevent you from ever spending family time together. It's the worst thing that's ever been created. And depending on which day you catch me is which, and I don't know which one is right, but I think both sometimes. And I think, it's hard to try to find that balance between how do we prioritize our family and yet also allow our kids to pursue things they enjoy and give them, constructive and fun things to do, and trying to find that balance. And I can say that for us early on, that we really prioritized family early on, and we said no to travel sports early on. So our kids were playing sports, but they were invited to play, especially, particularly my oldest, as you go through, he was invited. We kept him out of travel sports for a while, even though he was good enough to play travel sports. And so, because we felt like it would be better for our family, and that was really good. And then there was a point where we eventually moved into travel sports, and sometimes when our kids would try out for something, we would, soccer was our example. They might make, this certain level of team, and we would actually ask them to put them on a lower team because that team did less travel. So it was better for our family. So it was worse for our kids, sporting development, but it was better for our family. And so we've done that a number of times where we've sort of said, okay, how can we bump it down to a level that's a little more manageable for us? And so even as we're making sporting decisions, we're trying to figure out how much travel is involved in this, and how much is this going to affect our lives, and when are the games, and all of these, you're trying to juggle all these things. And to be fair, I don't know that there's one right answer, especially when you're talking about having multiple children and trying to, but I can tell you that, we've tried to juggle, the balance of our kids doing fun things and our family being a priority. And honestly, when we've had the most struggles with it, now that we have two kids in high school, And that has moved things to a busier pace than we've ever had before. And so, they have more homework than they've ever had before. Their high school sports practice 5 and 6 days a week. It keeps things really full. And so this is the most difficult time we've ever had of trying to have family dinners and trying to be together as a family. And when you've got multiple kids in high school with different schedules and different sports, and it is really, really hard to do. And I think we're always coming back to God and saying, God, would you give us wisdom to know how to navigate this? How do we not over prioritize sports or over prioritize school, or how do we try to find some semblance of balance in the midst of a really hectic season with multiple kids in high school, and where we're trying to figure out how do we keep our kids' hearts focused on God and not have them thinking that their sport is the most important thing, or that their academics are the most important thing, although those are good things, and I'm glad they're doing both of those things. But, and so how do we juggle all those? Mm-hmm. And I think it's hard.
Yeah. Well, you're leaning forward, helping in a lot of areas, and certainly your journey has set you up with a lot of wisdom and confidence to impart on others. Grateful, culturally, a lot of gratitude for people like you out there, really on the front lines. To your journey, who were the coaches, role models? What were the strong influencers that went into you early on, and why did you choose 20 plus years ago to enter the student ministry world?
Yeah. I would say I had a lot of great people in my life to love me, to care for me, growing up. I think probably the most influential, though, is when I got to college, and we got involved with the Navigators ministry there in college. And there was a guy by the name of Andy, and he was the first person who ever discipled me. He was the first person who ever started to meet with me one-on-one and actually help me figure out how do I grow? How do I grow in my struggles? How do I move forward in some of my areas of weakness, some of my character deficiencies? How do I learn how to do some of the things that I'd always wanted to know how to do, but I wasn't quite sure how to do those things? How do I read my Bible and get something out of it? How do I share my faith in a way that's natural? How do I pray? Andy showed me how to do all of those things. And his involvement in my life really transformed my life. And he was the first person that ever challenged me on thinking about my own self-centeredness. And he was the first person that challenged me to think, what if God wanted to use you to impact other people's lives? And what if life wasn't all about you? And no one had ever confronted me on that, or ever pointed out how, I was a self-centered college student, or, and no one had ever taken that individual interest in me to actually mentor me, to grow me, to teach me. And Andy did that, and it transformed my life. And Jana had my wife had a woman who did the same thing for her when we were in college and with the Navigators. And so I think that changed things for us. It changed our walks with God. It changed the way we saw the world. It changed what we thought was possible, I think. And so when we graduated, I went to work in the business world, and my wife went to work as a second grade teacher. And we were living in Tampa at the time, and we just thought, man, it'd be fun to give back a little bit of what God had given to us. And so we just volunteered with the Navigators at the University of South Florida, just kind of nights and weekends after we would get off work, whenever we could. And we just thought, man, wouldn't it be cool if we could bless students like we were blessed? And so we did that for about 3 years. And as we were doing that, God gave us a deep love and burden for college students. And suddenly we were thinking more about students than we were thinking about our jobs. And we both had great jobs that we loved. And as that began to happen, God began to put on our hearts that he wanted us to leave our jobs and become missionaries to college students. And so 20 years ago, that's what we did. We took the pay cut of a lifetime, and we left our jobs. We became missionaries to students, and that has been one of the best, most defining decisions, of our lives. And we look back, and it's been an incredible journey where God has given us the privilege of investing in countless numbers of students in the last 20 years, and being able to see God transform their lives, and see God transform, their future marriages, and see God transform the way they raise their kids. And it's just been incredible.
Well, that's true wealth. I mean, I always talk to folks about what wealth is. It's not a bank account. It's how much time do you have? What's your health? But it's that purpose. Is a big part of what wealth is, that you feel satisfied when you put your head down on the pillow at night and you're doing that. Certainly America wins with strong, healthy role models. America wins with strong, healthy mentors and coaches. You've been kind of life coached at a young age that helps sharpen you day in and day out. I think what can we do as institutionally to, if you had, maybe we can close out with this a bit, with a discussion about if you're a bit of a benevolent dictator, if you had some of the levers of policy and with generating cultural shifts, strong, healthy role models, not only at a national level, but within our communities, certainly role models. Let's focus on the role models that are in front of us, including parents and others. But they have another role, of course, of parenting. But you can also be strong role models in a community. And those coaches, not just athletic coaches, but others that are just sharpening you and helping you on a daily, routine basis. And then those mentors who are with you, kind of as helping you make those big decisions at life, when you're at some crossroads, just looking at the longer term strategy of your direction. That's kind of like the way I like to think of it. So within that context, where do you think we can do better, and what advice would you have to any leaders that are out there?
Yeah. Well, my thought is a pretty simple one. If everybody just found one younger person that they could pour their life into and help in some way, whether that's someone that they work with or someone at their church or someone, that they're coaching or whatever, but if everybody just found one younger person that they could help and encourage and be a cheerleader for and instill some wisdom in whatever area, I think the world would be a very different and a much better place. And I think that it's easy to for all of us to kind of get sucked into my family, my work, my job, my whatever all the things are, the good things that God's placed you in life, and to forget that you have something to offer to others, that you can bless others, and that it just takes a little bit of intentionality and effort to do that. And I think if everybody just found one person that they could mentor, that they could encourage, that they could help, the number of people who would be receiving mentoring and discipleship would skyrocket, and the number of people who would have someone that they could talk to about the important things in life would dramatically increase. And each of us would then realize that life is not about us. It's actually about other people. And so I think if people were to do that one simple thing, if we were all just to pick just one person, I think it would make a monumental difference.
Yeah, one person to mentor, and I like to say that's if the same person, we all can be coached and mentored. Also go search out someone to help mentor you as well, whether you're 16, 22, or whether you're 37 like me, or whatever the age is. Find somebody to help you, because we all need it. Michael Jordan had a coach and a mentor, I think. Chris Gatlyn and Dan Keeker can as well.
That's right.
Any final pearls of wisdom before I just close out? And just want to thank you, of course, for that service. There's a reason why you don't have any gray hair and where you're pretty young, because you are fulfilled and you're enjoying it. I think there is when you find fulfillment in what you're doing and the stress level goes down, I think we as a general rule age. Genes help. Good genes that you've had probably with your family, but it also is, let's keep that stress level down with what your profession is and looking at life the right way.
Yeah, one quote that has struck me lately, it says, if dependence is the goal, then weakness is an asset. And that idea that in my life, in your life, the areas, if the goal is to be dependent upon God, then the weaknesses that we have in our lives are actually blessings to push us towards dependence on Him, towards God, towards people, and not something that we need to hide and run from. And so I think that's something I've been thinking about lately that I think that we could all think about as we think about what does it look like for me to be more dependent on God and less dependent on me.
Yeah, don't be alone.
That's right.
Find others, yes, but others will challenge you and fail you too.
That's right.
But God doesn't when you look for and seek out Him. I love it.
That's right.
Well, Chris, thank you. on so many levels. Appreciate your friendship, and I appreciate all you're doing in this world.
Likewise. Thanks for having me, buddy. Good to see you.
Cheers, brother.